episode of the Cozy Corner of Cinema. This is episode number 183, being recorded on Wednesday, October 1st, 2025. It is officially Halloween season. You're going to be driving around, you're going to be seeing people's pumpkins, you're going to be seeing decorations up. You go to the store, they're going to have a section for costumes. Maybe you drive into the store and you see a Spirit Halloween pop up. People love this time of the year, and it's a great time of the year, and it's a very productive time of the year as well. We're getting the oppressiveness of the summer's heat behind us. We're getting nice, cool weather where it's not too warm, not too cool. It's prime t-shirt weather where you don't want to kill yourself, from being out all day. But it's just great, man. It's great driving around with the windows down, listening to music or a podcast or the radio or anything like that, man. I was out earlier. It's a beautiful day. The sun was shining. People were walking around. There was a lot happening. And we want to stay focused as well on our own work too. We want to, whatever it is, we got to get done. So if you're working hard at something, if you're writing that great American novel, or you're trying to make the next great American film or anything like that, you got to keep fully focused on it, because people are going to want to try to pull you away from what it is you want to do. Maybe you want to stay inside and you really want to finish this draft that you're working on. You're working on editing something, or you're trying to learn an instrument or something, and people are like, hey man, let's just go out, let's go to the store and look around. It's like, if you want to do that, then go for it. God bless you. It's your life to live. If you're not hurting yourself or anybody else, then it's not my place or anyone else's place to tell you how to do it, how to live your life. But at the same time, I can only speak for myself, whereas there's just so much to get done every single day. There's so much to watch, to read, to write, that killing time isn't even in my headspace. There's no such thing, because every day is just so precious, and we really want to be fully aware of that. And this time of the year, we don't want to rush. We don't want to rush into being like, oh, I wish it was Halloween, I wish it was Thanksgiving, I wish it was Christmas, because then next thing you know, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, it's already 2026, and I can't believe it was just 2025, and so on and so forth. So really want to cherish the time we have and be fully aware of it, and not dwell on the time that's passed, but look to the time that we still have, and to make the most of every day, so to speak. Even if every day, you're not at your full 100, but it's just being aware, man. Just being here, being very grateful to be alive. To associate with the people whom you associate with, to get to do the things you want to do. It's just great. It's really great, and we really don't want to take that for granted. Yeah, beautiful day out today. So I think now is probably around the time when we are going to get a lot of films released in the remainder of 2025 that will be talked about for the Academy Awards. As well as, I keep forgetting what the heck won the Palme d'Or this past year. I know I even looked it up before, and I already forgot. That's right, it was Just an Accident by Jafar Panahi, which should be coming to theaters hopefully soon. We'll see if that gets any talk of any Academy Award conversation, but we already have some films that are looking like they're going to be on the horizon for Best Picture nominees, so that'll be fun to watch. It'll be fun to discuss, who gets nominated for what and what films are nominated, and it's gonna be a lot of fun, because I recently just saw, and I won't talk about it. I'll wait till the time comes, but I did recently just see the new Paul Thomas Anderson film, One Battle After Another. It's great to get a new Paul Thomas Anderson film every couple of years. Quality filmmaker, and it's a quality film. I'm going to talk more about it in depth. People are predicting it'll be nominated for Best Picture, and I'll talk about that more when I go through all the films. There's a lot that I really like about it. There's a lot that I think kind of stumbled. So I'll talk about that more in depth. There's a lot of discussion around it right now. A lot of people giving their opinions. It's been very well regarded, very well talked about, and so I'm going to let it sit for a little bit, and then I'll come back to it and give my opinion on it. And also the other films that'll be coming out this year. We will see. Anyways. Okay. Let us talk about Larry Clarke. Larry Clarke is an interesting artist, filmmaker, personality, controversial one as well. We're going to talk about some of his films. We're going to talk about the documentary in relation to his most notable film, his most known, I should say, maybe not known or notable, whatever. It's completely subjective, but Larry Clarke, somebody who, now I may get some of this information wrong, so don't hate me too much. I believe he started out as a photographer, published some books including Tulsa and Teenage Lust. For the sake of this talk, we're going to be looking at some of his films. Now, I've only seen a couple of his films, and I did recently just watch his most famous film, Kids, from 1995. And I also watched the documentary that goes along with it, which was released in 2021, We Were Once Kids, which both of which don't even have they don't have good releases in America, and I don't know why. And it's a weird kind of thing with not only Kids, but with one of Larry Clark's other films, Ken Park. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Larry Clark's an interesting guy. He makes interesting films, and I've only seen a couple of them. I've seen maybe his most notable ones. I've seen Kids, I've seen Bully, and I've seen Ken Park. I actually have his both Marfa Girl 1 and 2 on Blu-ray, which I have not watched. But I think Kids, Bully, and Ken Park are the three that are always coming to mind when people are talking about his films. He's also done other films like Another Day in Paradise, What's Up Rockers, and I guess a television film called Teenage Caveman. I don't know. But Kids is a very known film, 1995, and it follows a day and a night in New York City in the 90s. We have a lot of first-time actors, I think almost primarily first-time actors, a lot of people that Larry Clarke found who were part of the skate culture, who were out on the street, causing problems or getting into trouble. We have a couple of other actors who would go on to be in more films and get to be more known. We have like Rosario Dawson in a small role in this, Chloe Sevigny, who is a big actress from this time, involving herself with Harmony Korine, who will also come up in the conversation because Harmony Korine also wrote the film. So he wrote it, Larry Clarke directed it. We also have Leo Fitzpatrick in the film, but it's primarily a lot of first-time actors, a lot of people who look the age. And I'll talk about the production. I'll talk about all that after when I talk about the documentary, because I think it is an important documentary to watch in the context of the film. We follow this group of kids. They're like teenagers. They look like some of them even younger. Some of these kids look like they're 12. And it's their daily life in New York. They are without parents. That's not to say they don't have parents, but almost all of the parents are not in the picture. They're going around, they're drinking, they're having lots of sex, they're doing drugs, they're talking about drugs, talking about sex, being very crude, very cruel to each other. And we follow a couple different characters throughout the day. We have Chloe Sevigny's character, who finds out at the beginning that she has HIV, so she has to go back to one of the other characters who may have given it to her. Now, I may get some of the characters mixed up, so I do apologize, because we have Leo Fitzpatrick in the film, who plays his character Telly. And now he hangs out with this dude, Casper, played by Justin Pierce. And I do apologize, because I forget which one is which in the context of the film. Let's see. Telly is the one. Don't worry, I'm gonna get it right here, guys. Telly is the one who, his whole thing is he deflowers these girls, these young girls. He's the one who, is the first. They're no longer virgins. It takes their virginity. Casper, on the other hand, is running around. He's got HIV, knowingly giving it to people. Shenanigans ensue. It's not as lighthearted as it sounds. These kids are wild. They're out of control. They're getting into fights. They're doing a bunch of crazy stuff. And it's observational to the point where it was interesting looking up some of the discussion on the film and people talking about. I recommend listening or watching the Siskel and Ebert review. They put it very well. They talk about it not quite being a docudrama, but feeling so realistic at times with some of the frank kind of conversations in the back and forth between these characters, these actors, that they started to question how much of it was sincere and how much of it was improvised. And apparently, a lot of it is close to Harmony Korine's script. I don't know how true that is. I would kind of question how close it actually is because of just how free flowing a lot of the conversations are. They show bits of the script in the When We Were Kids documentary, and a lot of the very crude, very vulgar dialogue comes directly from the script. There's a whole scene early on where the kids are just sitting in the living room of this house, and they're just talking about just this really frank discussion. It's a very good. This is a very controversial film of the '90s, and really kind of still is. I believe this originally received an NC-17, but to my knowledge was released commercially anyways, unrated. I believe it was unrated. I can't imagine that this would be an NC-17 distributed film. A studio is just not going to do that. But it was a controversial film because not only of, let's just say, the subject matter on its own. You have these teens who are drinking, doing drugs, having unprotected sex, really just kind of messing themselves up. And then you have more of the thematic stuff to it. These characters being very cruel to each other. They're friendly, but then at the same time, if they can, you get the sense that with some of these people, that if they can take advantage of someone else emotionally or physically or anything like that, they absolutely will. And it's a tricky film because you detest almost all of these characters. I think the only one you really can kind of sympathize with is Jenny, played by Chloe Sevigny. Who is the one where she is taking the most responsibility out of all this. She gets tested. She is worried. And, in this cruel world, not everyone comes out on top. Some bad things happen to these people. And it is a film that I actually like quite a bit. It's a film that it's not one you're going to want to keep watching again. I imagine that if you were alive, if you were a teen at this point in the 90s, it feels very sincere, and as it should, because you're making it with these kids at that time. So a lot of the skate culture, a lot of the music, a lot of the fashion, it all feels so much of a it feels so much of a time sort of capsule that if they were to make this film now and tried to duplicate it, it would be very tricky. I think there are sometimes you see a film that's set in the 80s and they just take it so over the top. It's so ridiculous. It's so like a caricature of what the 80s were or was. Not that I would know. But then you watch some films from the 80s and you would go, oh my gosh, this feels like a caricature. But no, it's sincere. And that's how this film is as well. It's, a lot of the dialogue, it feels very natural at the time. And I think that's one of the things that you see a lot of period pieces that take place at an era. And one of the things that I think is so tricky that a lot of these films don't get right is the dialogue, where kids are saying very cruel things to each other, saying very un-PC things to each other, and it's like I see so many films that's like, well, we want to be set in the 80s and 90s, but we don't really want to have that sort of the mentality that we had back then. We want to kind of make it contemporary, and it's just like little things like that will hurt the film. That's why mid 90s I think it's such a great film because it perfectly captures that era, and the dialogue in that film is so natural. It's sort of like you have everyone kind of messing with each other, saying horrible things to each other, but it's not out of any sort of maliciousness to each other. Not like in this film where they are yelling at, they're saying some crazy things and they're getting mad at people and stuff. But it feels far more genuine, or it feels more sincere than if you were to script this whole thing. And it's a film that I think a problem that I do have with it is a big problem that I have with his later film Ken Park. Ken Park is not a film I really like. I think there's things in it that I like, but I think a problem here that is accelerated in that is that the film can just be observational without being thematic. I think that's something that Gus Van Sant does so perfectly, in that you see his films where you can look at some of the quieter, slower films that he would make, like Elephant or Jerry. And yeah, in Elephant, you have a big event surrounding that, but that is far more quieter and observational, but also honest. And then Jerry as well, which is very, very low key, but ironically has Matt Damon and Casey Affleck in it. But it's very much like you are not. There doesn't need to be a big event for that type of film. And with this film, when you get to some of the more, I guess, controversial sort of scenes of this, I'm not as interested in that. That feels more removed from the naturalness of the rest of the film. Whereas I understand that you would have a character who'd be doing something crazy like this, but when you have multiple characters who are just so maliciously evil, it kind of takes me out of it a little bit. And that's not to say, of course, people and teens aren't like that, but I think there's definitely one sequence at the end of the film that was more head scratching than it was disturbing. It's almost like didn't even really need that, or this feels like it should have been in a different film. And people will disagree, and that's fine. This is a surprisingly enough, I thought this was more positively well received. But sometimes I like to kind of just see some, if I go to log in on Letterboxd or something, I see like the rating system. And Letterboxd is not a good gauge for quality of a film because, I mean, don't even look at some of the reviews on Letterboxd. Holy moly! But I saw that it was actually pretty split. A lot of lower ratings, a lot of higher ratings. So I get why people would love this film, and I do really like this film. But my issue with like Ken Park is that that's a film that, I mean, well, I have many issues with that film, but that's a film where it is trying, I think, too hard to be thematic, where it just gets so ridiculous, where it's not even disturbing. It's just bizarre in a bad way. Like, I don't even know why you made this narrative choice. This is like, that's a whole other conversation. I'm not going to dog on Ken Park, but that's one that I really don't like that film, and I know that people have a lot of problem with that in terms of Larry Clarke and how old he was when he made that, and which is a good segue into the documentary that is a good companion piece to Kids. This is called We Were Once Kids, directed and written by one of the actors in Kids, Eddie Martin. He has a notable scene in Kids where he is showing them how to remove the tobacco out of a cigar and to replace that and make a marijuana joint. Actually, he also directed a film that is also another documentary I like quite a bit called All This Mayhem, about these skateboarders in the 90s who were on the rise, and their own personal hiccups that got in the way of them becoming bigger, and their resentment at people like Tony Hawk, who they feel like they should have been him. But it's a very good documentary. I actually didn't even realize it was him at first when he did this. But anyways, so this looks back. It's part about the first half is about the production of Kids, where New York in the 1990s, people running around acting crazy and all that. And then the second half is a tribute to, it feels like a tribute to two of the actors who I mean, I guess it's not even a spoiler that's really happened, but we had two of the actors involved with Kids who passed away very young. We have Justin Pierce, who committed suicide when he was just 20, and then we have Harold Hunter, who died of an overdose when he was 25, I think. Or no, I'm sorry, Justin Pierce passed away when he was 25. Harold Hunter passed away when he was 31. It's a tribute to them, and also it is an indictment more so about Larry Clarke and how he handled the production. It's not quite a full-on attack on Larry Clarke, but it puts a lot of the blame on him in terms of this is an older guy who is associating himself with these young kids, and he's making this questionable content of a film. I remember I was reading a little bit about Ken Park, and people were talking about that film where he was older, and in that film, I mean, I won't go into a whole thing, but some of the content of that film, people were questioning the intent with Larry Clarke making a film like that. And it's interesting kind of talking about recently Pretty Baby by Louis Malle, and that's a film that I think context is important in that film. I talked all about that. It's a film I'm not even that crazy about, but everything reading about Louis Malle and his relationship with Brooke Shields, to me, I never got the sense he was making something that was what people I think made it out to be, because when you're dealing with, especially with anything involving a coming of age sort of film or kids, behaving honestly, there's a certain line that I think is very questionable to draw. And with this documentary, they talk a lot about not only Clarke maybe not being how do I want to say this, not being the most professional, I mean, being most very questionable with some of the behavior towards the kids in this. And there's one scene that's very uncomfortable when they talk about it's Larry Clarke and Harmony Korine at the Cannes Film Festival, and boy oh boy, I don't know if that clip was edited or not, but that clip did not make Larry Clarke look good, because some reporters asking him, were these actors underage in these scenes? Are they really doing drugs? In the film they talk about how he would provide them with drugs and he would film it. There's a whole rabbit hole to go down, and I really don't even want to comment too much because I'm not that familiar with Larry Clarke. I know him as a controversial filmmaker. I know that his films are controversial, but I think it would be inappropriate for me to jump to any sort of assumptions or jump to any sort of conclusions without being more well informed. I told the story before, but I remember I turned off a podcast once because it was right around the time I had just finished reading that brilliant book on the life of Norman Mailer and just how complicated of a person that he was. And I remember just hearing these people talk about him, and they were just, taking things out of context, or they were just not being well informed. And I said, you know what? I don't need to listen to this. These people don't know what they're talking about. It's not just that they didn't like him. They were just, it's a whole other thing. So I don't feel that way about Larry Clarke, because truthfully I don't know that much about him. But I think it does raise enough questions in the documentary of why is Larry Clarke making these kinds of films, not necessarily to tell a story about kids at this point, because that's not what it's trying to be, but it's sort of like, why is this a recurring theme in his films about these underage kids doing, having sex and doing drugs and all that? Because Bully had that as well, and Ken Park I think is more explicit than any of the three. Some of that was seemingly unsimulated. I mean, there's one real money shot in that they were for the most part 18, but that's a whole other conversation. Somebody more knowledgeable than I can get into that conversation. But the documentary, I think, rightfully addresses some of these things, and sort of the actor Hamilton Harris's feeling of betrayal, specifically from Larry Clarke, how he integrated himself into the lives of these, kids in the 90s. He gave them drugs and this and that, and then they say that he exploited them. And from their perspective, I can see where they're coming from. And in a way, I even agree with them to a certain extent. Whether or not a filmmaker has a certain obligation after a film is released is completely subjective. I guess it's all subjective. But in this film, they bring up certain points about, they were paid nothing. This movie goes on to make millions and millions. And, Larry Clarke dodges them. He sort of like use them and then toss them away. It points a little bit at Harmony Korine as well, how he was being kind of weird on the whole thing. I read a little bit of, I was curious about the reviews on this, how people were perceiving this, people who are more knowledgeable about Harmony Korine and Larry Clarke. Because Harmony Korine is still he's still a filmmaker. I mean, Larry Clarke is as well, but Harmony Korine can get, big actors and still make his out there films. He's not a filmmaker I like. Or I should say his films I don't like. I don't know the guy. I really, really don't like his films. People love him, and that's great, and that's cool. But his films annoy me like I can't even tell you. So the movie isn't totally pointing the finger at him as well, but it is kind of by association, where he is writing this dialogue, and even though he is younger, there's a weird thing going on with him and Larry Clarke. Larry Clarke is much, much older, and I think Harmony Korine I think he was like 19 when they made this, or he was 19 when he wrote it. I don't remember, but he's much younger. He's closer in age to these kids, but yeah, it's sort of like he as well sort of, involves himself in these kids' lives and wants to use like their names in the films and stuff, being more closer to them, but then once he has what he wants, throws them away and goes on to the next thing. So there's a lot of questions being raised. I think you could probably make a whole other documentary just about the Larry Clarke aspect of this, because they touch on that a lot. But say at the end that Larry Clarke and Harmony Korine declined to be interviewed, and you don't really blame them, because the movie does not paint them in the best way. But I also need to it also has to be reminded that we are getting one side of all this, whereas it's very tricky to do an indictment on somebody, but you're only hearing one side of it. That's not to say that Larry Clarke is or isn't guilty of these things, but ultimately, whatever you walk away with from the documentary, a couple we are getting one perspective basically, because there are some other actors that are interviewed in this. They talk about it being the kids from Kids, and they're the other actors who would go on, like Chloe Sevigny's, like Rosario Dawson. So they were kind of separated that way. But there's one part that I really like. There's a lot of archival footage in this, and they have Harold Hunter and Justin Pierce. They were accepting an award, and they feel like they're not dressed up. They're just they're going up there. They're kind of they're street kids. They feel very honest. So that was really great to see. It's sort of like, once the cameras are off and the parties are over, it's like, what about these people? And it was really, really touching hearing Hamilton Harris kind of talk about all this. There's clearly a lot of trauma that he has about him losing his friends and feeling betrayed by Larry Clarke. And they actually try to contact Larry Clarke at one point in the documentary, and he basically is like, no, I'm not doing this. So you really do feel for him, and it is really nice to see that in a film like Kids, no matter how bad things got, there's still a light at the end of it all, and it is just nice to see that journey of just like putting this experience, having the weight of this experience on you, but at the same time it not being a hopeless life to live, that you can make something of yourself no matter how dire or how bad the circumstances get. This one as well doesn't really even have a U.S. release at the moment. This is from 2021, and it still is not even available here. Umbrella put this out, but this is, I would say, if you haven't seen Kids, it would be interesting to kind of watch this, even with the context removed. But I would say if you've seen Kids, if you're a fan of Kids, then this is definitely worth watching as well. It's a loving tribute to these two guys who just died way too young. Larry Clarke's possible responsibility of one of them. It raises a lot of questions that I feel like it probably could have been a bit longer to go more in depth, because there's a lot to kind of take away from this, especially watching these two back-to-back, Kids and the documentary. There was a lot that I was sort of contemplating with, and I was thinking to myself and kind of replaying, interviews or moments or contexts in my head. But ultimately, they pair together very well. They are both worth watching. Again, they're both not even available in the U.S. For some reason. I know Kids has a DVD, and I know there's some overseas Blu-rays, but When We Were Kids, or We Were Once Kids, I don't even think has any sort of U.S. Release, to my knowledge. So if you want to watch it, you can find a way to watch it. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, interesting stuff. I like these kinds of films that they provoke, they make you, they recontextualize things. It's nice. It's nice to walk away with something that I'm actually going to be left with for a couple of days, that isn't so disposable and isn't just a, flavor of the week sort of deal. So, Kids, solid film, disturbing film, dark film, but very well done. And then We Were Once Kids is a sad, but also hopeful documentary, not just about this film and its controversies, but about a place and a time and making a life for yourself, even in the darkest of circumstances. And that is where I will leave this episode, because my throat's getting pretty dry, and I'm just about all out of water. So I'm going to refill the water. You guys take care. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. I always try to think of something to say at the end that's not so generic, but I haven't got there yet, so maybe I'll think of something next time. But with that said, until next time.